Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Fireside Chat. NNOA veterans volunteer on the Transition Assistance Team and offer a plethora of experiences in nonprofit, profit, government, entrepreneur, and academia. We are fortunate to have senior executives from a variety of professional backgrounds who have volunteered to share their experiences and advice in support of NNOA members facing transition. Leaving the military can be an incredibly intimidating experience, especially if service is all you've known for most of your adult life. Knowing what obstacles lie ahead can help you avoid the pitfalls and manage your expectations. Tonight, we're honored to have Colonel Asen J. DeHady, United States Marine Corps, retired. Oz is the director of the Advanced Program Group for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. He leads all the Northern Virginia intelligence community accounts and is responsible for the strategic direction that provides technology-based solutions to solve the complex IT problems within those mission sets. Oz served nearly 27 years on active duty as an AV-8B Harrier attack pilot. Notably, his final tour was his major command tour as the commander of the Marine Corps Cyberspace Warfare Group at U.S. Cyberspace Command in Fort Meade. His professional education includes a Bachelor of Science in Marine Engineering from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and a Master of Arts in National Security and Strategic Studies from the U.S. Naval War College. He is a MIT Seminar Fellow and has completed the Harvard Cybersecurity Leadership Program at the Harvard Kennedy School, the Selling Through Customer-Centric Program at the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School of Business, the Implementing Winning Strategies Program at the Columbia University Business School, and the SANS Security Leadership Essentials for Managers. He currently resides in Leesburg, Virginia. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my good friend, Oz DeHady.
Thank you, Biscuit, and good evening, everyone. I didn't intend for all of that to be read, but appreciate it, Biscuit. We'll get right into it. First, I think my task here this evening is to just kind of go through what my path was. Specifically, I'm going to focus on my transition, which is what we're here to share and to help educate others. But I'll probably do a little bit of background, again, just to kind of connect and kind of illustrate some of my drivers and really my journey on how I worked my way through the Marine Corps and then into the transitioning aspect of things. Before I continue, though, I do want to ask the audience and those to whom this will be most beneficial, what exactly, where are you in your journey? And where can I focus my comments this evening? So I'll pause for comments.
So Mike Files and Melissa and Divine, he's primarily focusing on his comments towards you guys because you're the non-TAT team members here and present. So feel free to speak up.
Well, good evening, everyone. Actually, I am here because I'm interested and because I saw Colonel DeHady's name pop up and I recognize him from Yuma. So I'm just an interested party. I have transitioned. I went from active duty to reserve status to separated challenges. And I'm, federal employee right now. So I'm merely here for interest and more support.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. All right, so I'll press on. I think one of the first things that I want to do is I've got just a few slides to help I think, frame some of my discussion. So I'll go ahead and press with that. And Biscuit, if you'll just give me a thumbs up that my presentation is up, I'd appreciate that.
I see it.
Roger that. All right. So I'll press on. I think here's my agenda. Again, I pieced this together from a previous similar discussion I gave, but I'll go through a little bit of an intro. I'll take a look at my career, and I'm going to harp on that because we've all heard along our journeys that you are in charge of your own career. And that is something I took to heart. There's limits to what we can do with our own careers, but I really believe that as far as what you perceive to be possible in the things that you are considering or going after. I'll talk a little bit about my advisors, mentors, and sponsors. I'll say a couple of words about how they're different. And then my transition to the private sector, which is a main piece here. And then I'll end with some footprints and fingerprinting. By way of background, I'll jump through most of this here, but I went to Jesuit High School in Houston, Texas. I had moved from Massachusetts to Texas, so talk about a culture shock that first year going into high school. Out of high school, jumped right into the Merchant Marine Academy and then on to the Marine Corps. This really is important, and why I have it up here, because there are a couple of themes that kind of, for me, aligned. The Jesuit school I went to, our motto was "Be a man for others," and obviously at the Merchant Marine Academy, our motto was "Acta non verba." You see in the ribbon at the bottom of that crest and that seal. And so, to me, I was really along a journey of service, which I carry and focus on through today in my role as a director for my teams. And of course, the Marine Corps is where I spent the bulk of my adult professional time until I retired and transitioned into the private sector. If there are any questions, by the way, please stop me along any point of this discussion and I'll elaborate or answer your questions. Or if I don't know, we'll certainly vector you to someone who can answer. Talking about heroes, go ahead.
Quick question. So how long have you been retired?
I've been retired 6 years. And as a matter of fact, I retired, my official retirement date is 1 July 2017, but I went on terminal leave at the end of March, and I started working at the beginning of May. So this month is 6 years, 1 month since I left the Marine Corps. All right. You see here my hero. I was fortunate enough to meet General Peterson in 2003. I was asked at the time, I think I was in the Virginia area in the NCR, and I was asked to participate in America's Eagles, which was a documentary that was being put together. And he was one of the folks who was being interviewed, and I met him in the green room, quote unquote green room, and we just had a conversation. This was, I think, like June 29th or June 30th. And for those who know General Peterson or who knew him, he had this big booming voice, and he just looked at me and said, "Haiti, what are you doing this weekend?" And I was like, "Nothing, sir." And he invited me and my family to his home for 4th of July barbecue. It must have been a Tuesday, that Saturday. And there began really a conversation and a relationship with the man who I highly regard for the things that he had gone through, the things that he represented, the trail that he blazed for many, many of us in the Marine Corps. And you just see a few pictures here. The one at the bottom right was roughly about 6 or 7 months before he passed away. We were at his home where he was presented with a Congressional Medal. And I was in 06 Command at the time, and I had the fortunate opportunity to be with him. But just a phenomenal warrior, truly walked 10 foot tall, and just meant a lot to me in my career. On this slide, I'll talk about advisors, mentors, and sponsors. Many advisors are folks who can be within or outside of your particular environment. I can tell you that I ping them often. Most of the folks across the top you recognize, most notably second from the right, General Stewart, who passed away very recently, unexpectedly. But I could spend hours about each of them, when I met them, how I met them, the impact they had in my career. But they were all either advisors, mentors, and sponsors. And what I will tell you is advisors are folks you can go to, ask a question regarding something that you're pontificating or looking at solving, and they can offer you advice from their perspective. Mentors, of course, typically have been where you are, or are sometimes lateral, or sometimes they are working within your organization, and they can provide a particular perspective on something that needs to be rectified. I've had many junior personnel within an organization and where I was in command or in charge of, who offered advice because they were seeing something on the ground that I wasn't. Sponsors, I will say, are folks who will speak about you when you're not in the room. Sponsors are not necessarily folks who are within your organization, but they are very, very important for your future. They are advocates. And it's very, very important that you seek out advisors, mentors, but sponsors. And sometimes you will not know that somebody is your sponsor because all of the sponsoring really happens behind closed doors. I will say that, across the top, they've all been mentors or sponsors of mine. Specifically, I will say General John Dog Davis, the third from the right, when he was Deputy Commandant of Aviation, was a sponsor of mine and a good friend to General Stewart, who was at the time Commander of Marine Forces Cyber Command, and talked to General Stewart about me coming on board at Marforce Cyber. That's significant because my time at Marforce Cyber uniquely positioned me for my transition into the private sector and what I'm doing today. And at the time I was working, after General Stewart, I was working for General Reynolds on the far right. The Marines you see in the far left were really impactful to me earlier in my career. They were both the two in the far left, General Gaskins and General Cliff Stanley, were both early mentors of mine when they were 1-stars, and I knew them on the East Coast. Certainly General Bolden, the astronaut I worked for when I was at 3rd Ma, he was a 3rd Ma commander, and General Bailey, around the time that I spent at the Pentagon, and some of you heard earlier, I spent about 8 years, over 3 tours at the Pentagon. The gentleman in the suit was Mr. Marshall, who I worked for at the Office of Net Assessment. And the work I did there and his advocacy and his program really set me up for moving into cyber, where I ended my career and really launched my next career from that position. So those are just a few. Across the bottom are some folks with whom I have deployed. Obviously, on the far left, you see the Summer Whites, which no longer exists in the Marine Corps, but circa 1990, 1991. I believe that was the graduation from TBS, and a colleague of mine with whom, and personal friend with who I still keep in touch, Dr. Ron Caro. In the middle, on my first deployment, had the privilege of cruising with my longtime friend who I met in flight school, Mr. Euseekers Williams, who today runs his own consulting company. And on the far right, a personal friend of mine with whom I went to war and served with, who was about to become the Deputy Commandant for Aviation this summer. I recently saw him out in Miramar. So these are just a few. There are many others with whom, again, you're going to find time to trade and learn from, and folks who will reach out to me for advice from time to time. General Stanley reached out to me recently. He had something that he believed that I was an expert, or at least I would know the right people, and I was able to leverage my my network. Any questions? Okay, I'll continue. So the transition to private sector. I mentioned at the top that I took to heart what the Marine Corps what I heard in my early years in the Marine Corps, which is you are responsible for your own career. So I always, as soon as I got orders to someplace, and this is important for the transition because it was a very focused area of mine. And I'll show you one quick illustration of the manner in which I was focused on my career. Let's see here. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see this spreadsheet here?
Roger.
Okay. Believe it or not, this is a little time chart that I kept throughout my 27-year career. And I would fill this in with every PCS, with every change of duty station, not so much for what I'd done, but for where I wanted to go and what was next. And I would select what I wanted and then I'd work towards that. I would certainly early and consistently let my chain of command and the monitor know what it is I wanted to do next. I'm not going to belabor this, but I tracked year by year where I was, what I was doing, when I did what, promotions, all the way out until I went on terminal leave. And I show this here because for me, it's an interesting look back at my 27-year career. But more importantly, it's an illustration of the focus with which I think you have to have throughout your career as well as your transition. The transition out of the military was a long one. It was nearly 4 years for me. And I kind of was postured to transition twice. The first time I was postured to transition was as an 05. And I just completed my tour at Headquarters Marine Corps. I had been selected to OSD to go work at the Office of Net Assessment. And I was planning at the end of that 2-year tour to go ahead and retire. Obviously, in that tour, I was promoted to 06 and then decided to continue. But what I will say is that that planning was continuous. It was always talking to people, talking left and right. At that time, since my 3 non-flying tours were in strategic analysis roles, I had really gotten familiar with the think tank world in the NCR. I knew pretty much everybody in every aspect of all of the top 20 think tanks. And we'd done war games with them. We'd work with them out of that Office of Net Assessment. And so I was thinking I wanted to transition into that environment. I had a very, very significant conversation with the president of one of those companies whom I met. And at the time, said to me that based on where I was and what he thought my goals were, that I really needed to go to private industry first before considering that which I thought is what I wanted to do. I drew a lot of intellectual satisfaction out of the strategic analysis and the work that I was doing. And I had done over 3 separate tours, totaling about 8 years. But he read me right, because one of the factors that comes into your transition is where you are on your personal targets and your personal goals. Where your family is and the things that are important at that point. Priorities change. And over 20 some years, I now had children who were one in college, one about to go to college, and one starting high school. And so one of the things I wanted to do was preserve the ability for them to have successful high school and transition into college careers. So I made decisions that kept my family where they were at that stage. When I left the Pentagon, I absorbed a 1-year unaccompanied tour in order to keep them in the same place. And when I returned, I was assigned to Fort Meade, where I pursued or started really my career in cyber. But the point of that is there are decisions that you're going to have to make as part of that transition that have to support not just career aspirations, but the whole picture with where you want to be and how it's going to best fit for your family. Specifically, because I knew coming out of the military, as most of us do, that there's lots of opportunity in the NCR. And so that was my target. I'll share the 4 things that really form the meat of the transition discussion. Over those 4 years, I'd say for about 2 years as an 05 and for about 2 years as an 06, I must have talked to hundreds of people about transitioning, most of whom were outside of the military, but a few who were inside the military. Those discussions were held at coffees, luncheons, walking down the hall inside the Pentagon, or just sitting on the bench and talking to a good friend. But I will tell you, what struck me were the similarities in each of their feedback and the collective advice that I got. And I summarize it in 4 things. Where do you want to live? What do you want to do? How much money do you want to make? And who do you want to work for? Everyone I talked to summarized what they had to say to me in those 4 categories. The where you want to live is not necessarily first, but for me, it was. I really wanted to focus, and at the time, my family's base was in the NCR. And so that was important to me. So I was very, very careful in whatever assignments that I would accept. I ended up in the NCR. One of the things I did not want to do was retire out of the military away from the NCR, since that's where I wanted to be. Not that you can't do that, but it would complicate things as far as being able to be present and interview and those kinds of things. So that was easy for me, easier as it was, I wanted to be in the NCR. What you want to do was a much, much harder question. Many of us at that point in our careers are on the cusp of, being branded a general officer. In other words, you are general in the sense of there's many, many things that you can do. And the task at hand was not necessarily my background as a Harrier pilot. My task was to lead a 600+ organization that was building up, and everything was new. I was not a cyber guy. I didn't grow up in cyber. And at the time, frankly, the Marine Corps was really dragging its feet and really filling in those ranks. So we filled the initial core of cyber personnel with aviators, intelligence officers, and commos. And that's how I found myself there. General Stewart was looking for people who had successful backgrounds and who could essentially learn on OJT, learn on the job. And so that's how I found myself at Marfor Cyber, supporting the mission of Cybercom up at Fort Meade. But the what you want to do transition, because of our upbringing in the military, we often respond with, well, what do you want me to do? Tell me what you want me to do and I'll get it done. Because that was kind of the spirit. That probably took the longest. Understanding what the skill sets were and how to derive upon what your individual story would be and how you would translate that to a potential employer took a long time to understand. I attended many transition assistance courses, the ruling course, the Marine Corps course, a couple others over those 2 attempts and considerations for retirement. And those are helpful. A lot of what you do there is kind of procedural, but they're helpful because they get you in the mindset of understanding what it is that you want to do. And at the end of the day, for me, what was going to derive the greatest satisfaction was to be in a position where I was able to lead a diverse group of people with a complex mission, and that was still going to have some national security impact. I am fortunate that even in the private sector, what I do today supports the mission, the big M mission of our nation. I and my team cater to all of the intelligence community accounts within HPE in Northern Virginia. And what we provide them, again, as Biscuit read, are solutions to their complex IT problems. some of which directly impacted what I was doing, both as an aviator for 20 some years and the last 5 or so years as a cyber commander. So it's very, very important. So where do you want to live, what you want to do? And also the last thing I'll say about what you want to do is it took a lot of talking to different people to kind of understand and distill what that was. The third question might seem direct, but it's not. How much money do you want to make? I was asked that question point blank. You're about to retire. You're in 06. You'll have, you know, the benefits that come with retiring as an 06. How much money do you want to make? And what the question really is asking, I learned, is how hard do you want to work? Many of my peers who had retired before me, you know, they put in the hard time that many of us did, and they were looking to find a comfortable spot, enjoy their retirement, and put in, you know, minimal amount of work, because they'd done twice that for 20, 30 some years. So the how much money you want to make for me, as I talked to folks, came down to how hard did you want to work? Did you want to continue on a 12 to 14 to 16 hour day regimen? Or did you want to scale back and do 8, 10 hours, whatever it was? And so that's a question you've got to answer that's got to fit with your personal life, your background, and frankly, how tired you are. Some of us take a little bit of a breather. I had about exactly, I think, 4 weeks before from the time that I went on terminal leave to when I started working again, even though I had over 90 days of terminal leave, I was as it were, double dipping for about a month and a half. But that's a question that's got to be answered, because that will drive the potential prospects that you will entertain. You're not going to go look for a job, or you may not understand that if you're going to be traveling and on the road, you know, 2-3 times a month, that's going to require you to live out of a suitcase, and you're putting in some long hours, not just interfacing with a customer or a mission set, but on the road, at the airport, dealing with all of that. So that was number 3. The last piece, number 4, had a lot to do with who do you want to work for? And that you don't really know until the terminal phase of the transition piece. And I say that because you'll meet with whoever is looking to hire you, and you'll have several interviews. And eventually, if you're lucky, and I would expect this, it's not if you're lucky, you should meet the person to whom you will directly report. And as much of an interview of you, that is, you are interviewing them to see if you're a good fit, and if they're a good fit, and if your working relationship will work between you and that person. And so those are the 4 things I learned in talking to probably dozens and dozens of personnel over a 4-year period. I took every opportunity to talk to anybody who would listen, anybody who would provide advice. But at the end of the day, where do you want to live? What do you want to do? How much money do you want to make? And who do you want to work for? I'll pause here for any questions or comments. I see a couple notes in the chat. Let's see here. Okay. Yes, I can go full screen. All right, so I'll press. So to me, the piece about who do you want to work for had a lot to do with those 4 sub-bullets you see under HPE journey. It was very, very important to me, not only who I was reporting to and their leadership, but what leadership opportunities that I would have. Almost as important to me as my compensation package was my opportunity for advancement. And not only my opportunity for advancement, but one of the things that I said to the vice president who hired me was, I need to know that you are going to be actively participating in my growth and development at this company. And you know, to be frank, that was something I enjoyed in the latter part of my Marine Corps career, and something that I felt as if had I had it earlier in my Marine Corps career may have made some differences on my arc. I left on my own volition. I left when I wanted to, but I may have had some different opportunities had I had some senior leadership attention. So in my second half of my career in the Marine Corps, that was a big thing for me to take interest in some junior personnel very early on and sort of be their mentor, advisor, or sponsor. So as I transitioned out of the military, this was a huge aspect for me. I don't want to just be hired to be planted somewhere and to bloom. I wanted to be hired to know that A, I had a path beyond my entry point, and that B, I would have someone in my chain of command, if you will, who took personal interest in my growth. This individual who was my direct senior, who brought me into the company, I had known for almost a decade. Did not know what he did, but we'd see each other often because our children had similar activities. And when I finally realized who he was and what he did, and he sat me down, initially he was counseling me on my other job opportunities. And along that path, he said to me, I'm a VP over at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. You should consider us. Hadn't even thought about it to that point. Started to research, started to look into it, and eventually landed there. The culture of the organization was obviously key. The good news is I knew somebody who was in this company. He recruited me. He brought me in, and he told me exactly what he intended. He understood my Marine Corps background. He was Army person himself, that in itself is pretty important, because I can tell you there's others I've come across who really don't get sometimes what the military experience has been and what you bring to the table as a leader retiring from one of the services. But he understood what the background was. He understood what the job had been. I've been in charge of organizations as large as 2,000 down to your smallest units. Within the private sector, it's not like that. It's matrixed. So you may have a dozen, maybe a couple of dozen direct reports, even though you're in charge of an organization that is several dozen matrix people. You're only going to get, in my experience thus far, a couple of dozen direct reports or less. So culture was important to understand how the organization worked. And prior to the transition, it was really largely leveraged by my interactions with this one individual, but he understood where I was coming from. And so in the months that we were talking and he was recruiting me, he would just continue to let me talk to others within the organization. Hey, talk to so-and-so. They've been here 8 years. See what they do. Talk to them, see what they like. Some were military folks, some were not. And so over 3 or 4 months, I think I began in earnest a serious consideration of Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Must have been in late September, October, and I was made an offer in February. So it was a bit of a lengthy process. While that seems like a long time, it really was the end of their fiscal year from the previous year. And then you really have about a month, maybe 2 months, where they're actively doing anything before they really shut down for the holiday period, which really starts mid-November. And they're not talking to anybody again, at least in this company, until mid or late January. So really, it was a couple of months before the Thanksgiving holiday began, and about a month after that was really substantive for me in those discussions. But leading up to that, he was advising me on the other opportunities I had. And it came down to the fact that this particular leader took personal interest in my in the opportunity I had with this company, and could look me in the eye and say, hey, I'm going to take a personal interest in your development. And part of that talk track was, you don't really understand how this private sector environment works. I know your value as a leader. I know what you've done. He was familiar. And he said, it's going to take you about 12 to 18 months to really kind of get the flow of what's happening around here. And then I'm going to come back for you. So my initial entry level position was put on a team supporting the customer from where I just came at Fort Meade. And I was part of that team working some of their issues, IT issues there. So in that 12 to 18 months, I really got to understand some of the jargon, some of the lingo, how things were operating. One of the hardest things for me was the idea that this job was a remote job, and that, which was, you know, anathema to how I had been brought up. You've got to be with your people, and this job was one where it was remote, and so that was probably one of the things I had the biggest consternations about was, how's that going to work? I'm not going to see them day to day. I can tell you 6 years on, I wouldn't trade it. Much more effective and efficient from a productivity perspective working from home. However, I take it upon myself to have frequent opportunities to interact with my team, whether it's on travel or we have several events a month where I bring them in. But I understand also that my team is all over CONUS. I've got people in California, people in Florida, South Carolina, all over. And so you kind of realize that the ability to bring everybody together is not what it once was. You don't have a unit standing at the flagpole for morning muster. And so you have to transition and open up your aperture to understand what that's going to be like. But 18 months, almost to the day, this leader came back and said, okay, you now have seen how this environment is. I'm going to assign you your own business. 6 years later, I've been promoted 3 times and working as a director with this organization and looking to move even further. So the culture was a good fit. Organizationally, I kind of talked about that already. This company is a large 60,000 personnel company, $36 billion company, global company. And the sector in which I work is a sliver to all of that. There are some very, very significant peculiarities with where I work because it is all IC. Everybody on my team has a clearance, has a poly, and you can imagine working in a company that is global, where a lot of the functions and operations are overseas and in foreign countries. We are very, very careful how we do what we do to support my particular customer. I'll pause here for any further questions.
Hey, how you doing? This is Divine Johnson. I've been listening in, haven't had a chance to introduce myself earlier. I missed that opportunity. But I'm probably about a year out from transition. I'm still active duty Navy, but looking to retire here soon. A couple quick questions for you. One, you talked about the job offer you received in February, but I think you have been talking with the gentleman since September. Was that a final job offer, or did you already go through the interview process and all of that, and it just took a while? If you could elaborate a bit.
Yeah, that was the final job offer. I think I had 6 interviews over time. And some of those interviews were not necessarily with folks in my line. They were lateral, one of whom is my mentor in the company today. So yeah, it took a while. I knew I was going to be in command, and I got lucky because typically the Marine Corps does changes of command. I think unlike the Navy, most of our changes of command occur in the summer because we have our large moving season. I know from experience that the Navy will, they'll fleet up, right? The upcoming CO for the most part is the XO, not so much in the Marine Corps. And so I was lucky in that my successor was in the unit and a good friend of mine. And so we were able to coordinate amongst ourselves because they really wanted me to start in February, and I couldn't start in February because I couldn't do my change of command prior to that. So to answer your question, beginning in September was really the first time he and I had coffee together where he said, hey, I know I've been talking to you for a while with some of these other companies you're looking at, but perhaps you ought to consider our company. The first thing I said to him, I said, I don't want to be in sales, because I knew he was a sales VP. And the response was, well, I get it, but everybody's in sales. which is kind of a true statement. But I am in sales. I'm a sales director today, and I do like it. But that conversation that started out with the coffee, where he actually broke down to me the different parts of the organization, and this is the level of interest he had. He kind of broke it down for me in ways that I could understand, at least initially. He essentially said, "Hey, your sales. Think of your sales reps as your infantry. Think of your finance people as your artillery." And he kind of gave me that spatial and comparison understanding of what I was getting into, so that I could understand who was doing what and who were my frontline folks, who were my support folks, etc. So clearly, when I joined the team, I was essentially a co-program manager with another person who was running this $800 million program. But his intention was never for me to stay there. His intention was always for me to go and run my own business. And so those talks, I look back now, that we were having had nothing to do with the 18 months I spent in the company when I first joined. They had everything to do with what he intended for me, which was to run a portion of the business. So did I answer your question, Dubai?
No, absolutely. I appreciate that. And if I could ask kind of a second part to that, you walked through the kind of the four things that you were looking at, and what you wanted to do was kind of one of those challenging ones. And that's kind of where I'm at now. At what point did you get into the kind of the computing cyber field? I heard you mention you at Fort Meade, but at what point in your career did that?
It was very non-standard, because I'd spent my whole career as an aviator, with the exception of 3 Pentagon tours, where each of them I'd done strategic analysis. First, for the Secretary of the Navy, did strategic analysis and speech writing for Gordon, England. Then my second tour was at Headquarters Marine Corps, where I worked for the Commandant in the Strategic Initiatives Group. That job landed me at Net Assessment, where I worked for the gentleman I showed you in the previous slide, Andrew Marshall. That 2-year time I spent at Net Assessment really set me up for everything after. The Office of Net Assessment has one of each of the services. So there are 5 military advisors. As a Marine military advisor, one of my tasks in the question, you come into the office, and you're essentially, over a period of about 3 months, you're assigned a question that you're going to research for the next 2 years. My question was, how would U.S. military power projection succeed in an anti-access area denial world 30 years in the future, right? That was essentially my question in a nutshell. Make a very, very long story short, in 2 years of research and wargaming and everything else, I came up with a dissertation essentially that said that we were dependent on an information technology backbone, as well as potentially we could be hamstrung by it, right? It was our critical vulnerability, and it was our center of gravity. That paper got the attention of some folks at the Pentagon, hence General John Dog Davis recommending me as my sponsor, recommending me to General Stewart, who had just taken over as Commander Marfor Cyber. So that's how I landed in cyber, was from that paper I did at the Pentagon talking about IT. And there were 9 technologies that I had identified in that 2-year research that really spoke directly to how we would fight in 30 years in the future and what our vulnerabilities were. So kind of fast forward, so I came in cold into cyber. Like I said, it was aviators, commos, and intelligence officers. Today, one of the legacies I left behind was we created a cyber MOS. They are growing cyber people now from the ground up. From the time they come into the Marine Corps, they're assigned to cyber MOS. They go through certain schools. There are cyber units in the fleet now. Those weren't there. So in that time I spent at Marfor Cyber, I came to learn quickly what the environment was, what that domain meant, and how we would fight in that domain, and learned and did some pretty interesting things. And so even coming out of cyber, when I was in this time frame talking to this gentleman about my transition, I knew just enough right? You know, an inch deep, maybe a mile wide, but not very, very deep into what really a cyber professional would be. As a matter of fact, one of the people I talked to in that couple of years of trying to figure out and having copies was the gentleman by the name of John Hamry. He was the CEO and president of CSIS. So I went to meet with him, and how did I get an opportunity to meet with CSIS? A colleague of mine was doing business with him. Seekers Williams, I pointed him out earlier. He knew him, and he said, "Hey, you got to talk to John." So I had 2 meetings with John, Mr. Henry, and he's the one who said to me the first time I met him, he said, "Do you consider yourself a cyber person?" And the first time I said, "No, you know, I'm pretty new at this." And this was over a couple of years. The second time the question was asked again, and I could answer yes, because I'd seen enough and I'd done enough in the environment to understand that. And his point to me was simply this. He said, "You know, you're in a unique position that you could really leverage when you do your transition." And I had to get into the mindset of considering myself a lifetime aviator and a TAT pilot as now a cyber person. And I didn't think that because it's not what I had been trained for, but I had been in it, knee deep in it, doing it every day. And I had to have that mental shift of thinking to myself, yes, you are in this environment, and you can leverage that attribute. And so that was an important step, because the mentality that you're going to walk out when you do have these opportunities with these folks is gonna really carry you a long way. The other thing I'll say is in the transition period, in the dozens and dozens of folks with whom I spoke, one of the other pieces of advice I got was, don't ever shotgun your resume. Don't ever take your resume and just send it out to a bunch of people. My resume was handed by hand to one person. And when I mean by hand, an email or physically by hand. And that person would sit on it, think about it, and would share it with another person whom I did not know, and so on and so forth. And so I tell transitioning warriors today, you know, discreetly give your resume to folks who you trust, and who they can talk to and have connections with. And that went a long way, even though I ended up with a company with somebody who I had been interacting with and didn't know really what they did. The alternatives I had 3 other options, were discreetly handing my resume to one person who handed it to another person who handed it to the third person. And of course, the other thing is you want to tailor the opening paragraph, and you guys know this, but you want to tailor the opening paragraph for the job that you're seeking. So in my case, I was very, very general with what I did, because at that time, in that time when I was just talking to people, I was looking for that particular avenue. By the end, I could really focus down into what I wanted to do, because at that point, I was focusing on being I was a cyber person looking to work in IT and looking to translate the skill sets that I'd picked up to that point. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. No, I appreciate that.
Sure. So I'll continue on here to my last slide, really, which is footprints and fingerprints. Essentially, what I'm saying here is the path that you've walked, the journey that you've seen in your career is very, very important. I just gave just a couple tidbits of my journey. Really, there's a whole lot in a 27-year-old career to bring you to where you are. But the last 3 or 4 years were really, really substantive for me in how they kind of poised and positioned me for what I'm doing today. And so it's really, really important. And by the way, I'll add this. That opportunity for me to go work for General Stewart at Marfor Cyber came from General Doug Davis, as I mentioned, among others, but he was one of the principal ones. He was Deputy Commandant for Aviation. And for a couple of years in the Pentagon, he knew me. I didn't know a whole lot about him, but he knew me. And I kind of know how he knew me. It was through another couple other colleagues. But he'd see me in the hallway, and he kept telling me, hey, come see me. Hey, Oz, I want you to come down to my office and come see me. Believe it or not, I didn't go see him for a year and a half, 2 years. And when I finally went to see him and we talked about my career path and what he thought, he was able to say to me, hey, I need you to go talk to General Stewart. And that occurred at a social event. We were actually, all the Harrier pilots in the area, Doug Davis was a Harrier pilot, we were greenlighting him at his house. And at that party was the other general whom I met, and he pulled us both aside and kind of put us together, and we spoke. And this was probably a year before I deployed for a year to Bahrain. And on the backside, I had orders to Mark IV Cyber. So again, footprints are very important. Where you're walking, who you're allowing to help shape your future and your career, all that will translate into potentially the transition pathway. Looking at these sub-bullets here, leadership, focus, timing, and preparation. Again, I was always very consistent and persistent in what I wanted. I never once would say to the monitor, I want to go to job A, and then 6 months later say, I'm going to go to job B. I took a lot of time to figure out what I wanted. Then I would never change that. I was very persistent with that. And I think that worked pretty well for me. Avoiding opportunity entropy, I think really what I mean there is the idea that you're never going to have all the information you need. So you're going to have to go with the best that you got in those 4 areas, right? Some of them will be easier than others. Where do you want to live? What do you want to do? How much money do you want to make? Who do you want to work for? And hopefully all of those are above your cut line that you're willing to pull the trigger. And I say that because by and large, you're going to have options. It was a very tenuous couple of years, but at the end of it, I had 4 options to choose from. And some were no-brainers as far as, no, I don't want to do that. But some were, a couple were really good opportunities. And fingerprinting everything you do, obviously, I don't have to tell this crowd that's the mark of a leader. You come into a new organization or you're embarking on a new endeavor, you've got to make it work for you. You've got to certainly understand what your needs are and how that's going to fit into your timeline, into your construct. I think we've got 6 or 7 minutes left, so I'll stop here and just open up for general questions. Biscuit?
All right, if we can kill your screen, that way we can see everybody. And yeah, just want to thank Oz. Obviously, like you said, always prepared. Even when we flew together a long time ago. So one of the benefits of these types of fireside chats is that you get the opportunity to ask the question of the speaker, but also the other members. And like Oz says, you never know, the connections that you make might end up being the solution to your problem. Because what I found that's consistent with a lot of these fireside chats is that network is huge. Because as hard as it is with transitioning, there are people that are advocates out there for you, and they can move your documents, put in the right word, but in the end, you have to show up and do the work, and usually that's not an issue. As we know, the challenge typically is getting the opportunity.
So
Thanks for your.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to make a comment. I'm able to see Melissa Ayers' picture a little bit more clearly now. I do remember her.
Yeah.
Initially, I thought the name sounded familiar, but I remember. I can't remember which squadron or unit it was, but I vividly remember you, Melissa. So thank you for joining.
Absolutely, sir. And all the congratulations for your entire career. Since we have seen each other, I know it's a little hard to see because I'm outside.
Yep.
But yeah, I was with the first one. CAS.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
That's good to see you. And you too, Captain Barnes, sir.
Melissa, I remember serving with you on many, many years on the NNOA boards and stuff, and your service to this organization goes way, way back. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Absolutely.
Hey, Oz, the thing I wanted to say to you is first of all, I appreciate you being our speaker tonight. And I've used the similar descriptions that you use. I use coach, mentor, and sponsor in the same exact descriptions as you used them. And I just wanted to point out that sometimes those are three different people, but as oftentimes where a single person may be all three of those roles as well, or maintain two of those three roles. But the importance of having all three of those kind of folks in your career can't be overstated, because that sponsor speaks for you when you're not around, when you're not aware that you have impressed somebody and they are impressed significantly enough to speak on your behalf. It could be at a selection board, it could be at a job discussion board, etc. But I really enjoyed the way you described the importance of those three. My other comment is, at least in your career progression, it appeared that you had a lot of interface with your commanders or your seniors way above you. And we've also heard descriptions of how important it is to maintain that contact information with your peers and subordinates. And I know you talked about some of your friends and some of your colleagues that you might have flown with that had an impact on your transition as well. But would you speak a little bit more to that, the importance of those colleagues that may have been in places that you weren't in, and they could discuss with you and tell you what it was like to be in those positions, even though you hadn't had an opportunity to do so on your own?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it is just, cross-decking, talking to people like Biscuit, who he and I went to flight school together and lived next to each other in the same apartment complex. And yes, he made an allusion to, he never lets me forget that he and I were student and instructor for one flight. He was a plowback, and I got to fly in the front seat under the bag with Biscuit as my instructor. But and we had a pretty good trip. But important to make those connections and understand, things like homesteading, which the Marine Corps at that time was not a big fan of. But I would talk to Biscuit about his experience with that. Because there comes a point in your career, as I mentioned, where your priorities change and you're kind of looking at different things. And I know within the Navy, there was much, much more opportunity in some cases, not all, in some cases, to be able to spend more time in one location or not. But outside of my unit was also very, very important. One of the limitations, if I let it be a limitation I had, was that there were no Black generals within aviation that I could reach up to. In other words, I had a lot of I wouldn't say a lot, but for me, plenty of leaders that I could look to, but they were all outside of aviation.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. General Davis was probably the first high-ranking officer who took a personal interest in me, and I know how that happened. That happened through, on one of those slides I showed Gila Gehring on the bottom right, who's about to become DCA. Gila was one of his, handpicked people. And I had been in the squadron with Gila. I had been Gila's XO. We went to war together. And so I know he never said that, but he was a sponsor. He had been talking to General Davis about me, who then started to take a personal interest. And so those things can happen outside of your silo. And they're very, very important, because you do not want to just have just your MOS in your corral.
But you were also a Harrier guy, and your aircraft eventually sundowned. So what impact did that have on your decisions to what jobs to take as well.
Yeah, they have sundown, but that was well after I'd left the Marine. Yep. I think there's still one Harrier squadron left, but you're right. Around the time I left aviation in 2008, right?
Yeah.
So I'd done my MAG tour and had been over and headed over back to the Pentagon. So I did Pentagon tour, net assessment tour, cyber, and then I retired from there.
Great. Thanks so much. I think we're at that 1 hour point, Biscuit.
Yeah, so for, let's see, Divine, Michael, Melissa, if you got any burning questions, we have Oz's contact info, but I'd like to thank everybody for joining tonight. And I certainly learned something, because honestly, you're never done transitioning. Like Oz said, one of the key decisions for me was I was tired, so I didn't want to row that hard. So I'm working for a nonprofit and loving it. But thank you for joining us tonight, Oz. Appreciate your time and your words. And I guess the next one, I'll send out the info. But hello, B.
Hey, Miss B.
Mike, we can stop recording, and that this ends like the formal portion.